Within the Zelda community, there's a concept known as the Zelda Cycle. No, I'm not referring to the Master Cycle Zero from Breath of the Wild. This is a concept that has existed for well over 10 years now. It essentially means that with each new main console Zelda release, the perception within the community greatly shifts with all the other previous games. Is there any merit to this theory? We're going to discuss that right now. Hey, what is going on, guys? It's Ryan here from Game Essays. This channel is all about talking about some of my favorite game series, including The Legend of Zelda and Pokemon. We like to sprinkle in some other games from now and then as well. But if you are into Zelda and a lot of these Nintendo franchises, I highly recommend you not only hit the like button on this video, but also hit the subscribe button to get a lot more of this content. So today we are talking about the Zelda Cycle. Like I said, this concept has been floating around and was probably at its most heated discussion around and in between the releases of, I would say, Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. Now, this photo it's probably ancient history in terms of like internet culture now. Obviously, you can see this is even before Skyward Sword was released, but this is the most famous iteration of the Zelda Cycle that I could find. There wasn't really an updated one, but I wanted to talk this one through because I feel like in a lot of ways this kind of came to be, this image right here. And then let's talk about Breath of the Wild. Now that we've had several years since Breath of the Wild has come out, I think 4 years at this point, I feel like the dust has settled and pretty much everyone has decided where they are with Breath of the Wild. But first, let's take a look at this Zelda Cycle, and then we'll see if it still applies with the release of Breath of the Wild. So we start with Skyward Sword, where it says this cycle will only come into effect when Skyward Sword is released. The game will be the new object of hate for the fan base. I would say, although Skyward Sword did get a lot of praise at the beginning, I think there was a lot of criticisms as well. Mainly critics like IGN and other big game sites were, glowing with praise on Skyward Sword. I mean, I myself did enjoy the game, but immediately I was not in love with it. There were definitely problems that I had with it, and I think the community was with that. So I would say this part of the cycle is largely true. Now we go to Twilight Princess as we work our way back through the cycle. Previously hated Zelda game is now considered acceptable by the fan base. The game will get some praise here and there, but will not be considered amazing. The game will have a decent fan base, but none as the big current top game. I would also agree. I think at this time, Twilight Princess definitely got a lot of hate when it was the game that was, the most recent main series Zelda game. So I would also agree that this is true, that criticism kind of calmed down because people were like, motion controls, I'd rather play Twilight Princess, I guess GameCube version at this point, because the Wii version did have motion controls, but maybe not as annoying as some people found it for Skyward Sword. Anyway, we continue to work back here. Zelda game from 2 generations ago becomes adored by fans. It is considered the best Zelda game. The originally small fan base for this game becomes sizable and quite vocal. This, I don't know for sure if this really happened with Wind Waker. Wind Waker definitely has gotten a lot more love over the years. Initially it did get a ton of criticism. So I would say this is like a half-truth, but then we have the previous god of Zelda games is now considered overrated. The fan base insists on looking at its flaws and praises the new king of Zelda games. So this is referring to Majora's Mask, which definitely was around the time of Twilight Princess era and Skyward Sword era. Within the Zelda community, I would say from my perception, obviously it's all subjective here, Majora's Mask was the game in the Zelda community. That was the game. And has that shifted a little bit? I definitely think so. But we'll talk about the most recent stuff in a minute. And then finally, looking at Ocarina of Time, it says once Skyward Sword is released, the game will go from overrated to outdated classic. The game still has a decent fan base, but will be considered good for its time by many people. I think that is somewhat true as well. So this is, I think, a pretty accurate representation of when Skyward Sword came out, what was the perception within the community, as well as the, going 4 games back, what was the perception? And I think the Zelda Cycle here, right? So if a new game enters, then Ocarina of Time kind of stays in that outdated classic category. But let's move on. Let's shift to, does this cycle hold true when we shift to the newer games? So, wow, look at this. The magic of OBS. Oh my God, look at that great. It's not even Photoshop. Anyway, I was too lazy to make a better one. So let's try and just fill in replace the names in these little descriptions here. But okay, Breath of the Wild comes out. So this will be the new object of hate for the fan base. So I would say to a degree, yes, but it took a while, because I think initially everyone was in love with Breath of the Wild when it came out, myself included. It's still one of my favorite Zelda games, but I think it is nowadays within the hardcore Zelda community, because we know this brought a lot of casual fans in. At the end of the day, Breath of the Wild is the best-selling Zelda game ever by a country mile, I would say. So it's bringing a lot of new people in, but within kind of that hardcore Zelda fan base, I do think a lot of times Breath of the Wild now gets a lot more criticism than it does praise, but I think it's just because everyone knows what's great about the game, and now we just want the sequel to improve upon what was kind of the weaknesses of Breath of the Wild. So does it seem like it's the object of hate right now? I would say yes. Now, previously hated Zelda game is now considered acceptable by the fan base. The game will get some praise here and there, but will not be considered amazing. I would wholeheartedly agree with this with Skyward Sword. It's definitely not getting as much hate as it used to, because it's kind of out of the limelight. It's coming right back into the limelight though with Skyward Sword HD. So maybe some of that will surface up. We'll have to see what adjustments they make with Skyward Sword HD. Now, Zelda game from 2 generations ago becomes adored by fans and is considered the best Zelda game. The originally small fan base of this game becomes sizable and quite vocal. I absolutely think this is happening right now. I'm seeing this just kind of everywhere throughout, Reddit, YouTube. Twilight Princess is having a resurgence, I think. I think over the last year and a half or so. And part of that, it's not, we're looking at this, I'm kind of acting like this is the same group of a couple thousand people that are having this perception shift. It's a lot of it is new people coming in to the community, some older people maybe leaving the community. And at the end of the day, right, each generation of Zelda fans is going to grow up and have their game. For me, it was, the Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask generation. But I think the next pivotal generation was Twilight Princess. And there's going to be a lot of people who Breath of the Wild, that's their game. Moving forward 10 years down the line, they're going to stand by Breath of the Wild. Right now, I just think that the nostalgia point we're hitting is for Twilight Princess. And that's why I think it's hitting the perceived as the best Zelda game. And I think there's an argument for Twilight Princess. I think there's an argument for almost any Zelda game being the best Zelda game. Will I always agree with it? No, but I think anyone can make a case for it, and it all depends on what you grow up with, right? Partly, my perception, like I said, some games that I really loved growing up, Wind Waker, I love that game. Am I as strong on Wind Waker as I was when I grew up with it? No, definitely not. I see now a lot more flaws in the game, also with the context of playing new Zelda games. So do I think right now Twilight Princess is kind of hitting its stride as being one of the more popular games within the Zelda community? I absolutely do. Now we go to the previous God Zelda game is considered overrated. The fan base insists on looking at its flaws and praises the new king. I don't think Wind Waker is getting necessarily as much hate, but I don't think it is considered the God Zelda game at all. I don't know if it ever did quite hit that point like Majora's Mask did. And then once Skyward Sword is released, the game will go looking at Majora's Mask. I shouldn't read that part. Is now Majora's Mask looked at as an outdated classic? Maybe a little bit, I think. It definitely hurts that the 3DS version, a lot of people, I've never played the 3DS version. I might. I'm kind of back and forth on it. I own it, but I know people talk about how flawed it is, and I know all the issues with it. So I'm a little hesitant to try it out. But basically, that didn't help modernize Majora's Mask. There's definitely some dated elements to it, but the 3DS version did not do a good job. It had some improvements, but it was like one step forward and two steps back, unfortunately. Nevertheless, is Majora's Mask looked at a little bit of an outdated classic? And I don't know if necessarily. So I would say this cycle's pretty close, and honestly, the person who came up with it did a pretty good job of predicting how, fans would perceive games. But like I said, it's not just like it's this one group that is thinking of these games, and then as new ones come out, their minds change. We always have new people entering the community and some people leaving. And then, like I said, it really depends on what you grew up with. That plays a large influence on how people perceive games. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. And then the latest game that comes out, the game that's really in the forefront, is also going to make us have like a grass is always greener situation, right? Because what's everyone, with Breath of the Wild being the game right now, everyone's like, I want my traditional dungeons. So it's almost no surprise that Twilight Princess is getting a lot more praise, because that's one of the games that did traditional Zelda dungeons the best. So that's kind of another reason. People might play Breath of the Wild and be like, oh, maybe I miss the story of Skyward Sword. It's always going to make you look back to the other games and what they did better, and that therefore your perception's going to change. That's just kind of the nature of it. But it's a great community to have. I mean, there's not many other video game communities in my eyes where every game is so celebrated, right? If you think about it, like, there's not too many other series that are this special. Maybe something like Resident Evil, but even then, do a lot of people go back and play the PS1 Resident Evils? I do, because I have a podcast where we play retro games, and I love those old games and stuff like that. But Zelda games, it is one of those series that people will go back and they'll try to play all of them. And I don't think there's a lot of game series that are like that. It's like once the new improved game is out, then there's a lot of series where it doesn't make sense to ever go back and play the old one. So that's what I love about Zelda. And the fact that the Zelda Cycle even exists should speak volumes about how great the community is, that people care enough about the old games. You don't see that everywhere. So anyway, this was a discussion that's been in my head for a while, and I would love to get feedback from you guys on, do you think there's any merit to the Zelda Cycle? Where do you think people stand with all of these releases? Do you think Twilight Princess is the new community favorite game? Let me know. Definitely. I would love to continue this conversation. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more kind of open discussion, kind of off the cuff videos like this, definitely let me know, and make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this channel, and I will see you guys next time.